Hello, my dear listener. Tonight, we're going to travel far away into the dark heart of history, a place where the mist never lifts from the mountains, and where the name of one man still echoes through the silence of centuries. His name was Vlad Dracula, the Prince of Wallachia. To some, he was a hero, a protector of his land. To others, he was a monster, the Impaler, whose cruelty knew no bounds. But tonight, we will not judge him. We will listen. We will walk through the corridors of time, softly, quietly, to understand the world that shaped him, the wars, the betrayals, the hunger for power, and the loneliness of a ruler trapped between fear and faith. So, find a comfortable place to rest. Close your eyes and let the whispers of the past guide you into the story of the prince who became a legend. Long ago, in the mist-covered hills of Transylvania, a baby's cry echoed through the stone halls of a small fortress. It was the year 1431, and the world was a dangerous place. The child's name was Vlad. He was born beneath cold stars to a noble father, Vlad II Dracula, a knight of the Order of the Dragon, a secret brotherhood sworn to defend Christendom against the Ottoman Empire. The name Dracula meant the dragon, and so his son would carry the name Dracula, the son of the dragon. From his very first breath, Vlad was surrounded by whispers of war. His father's castle stood upon rolling hills and cobblestone streets, where merchants passed with wagons full of silk and spices, and soldiers sharpened their blades beneath banners of red and gold. But even as a child, Vlad could feel something heavier in the air. The tension between kingdoms, the fragile balance of power. His father's allies changed with the wind, and enemies watched from every direction. At night, when the fires dimmed, he would sit beside his mother, listening to priests chanting in the old tongue, soft, low voices that filled the cold halls with echoes of faith. Outside, wolves howled through the forest, their cries mixing with the wind like a warning from the mountains. Even as a boy, Vlad learned that peace was only a shadow, and that in his world, survival was an art. He watched his father rule with pride and with fear. Messengers arrived at dawn, bringing news of battles, betrayals, and shifting loyalties between Hungary, Poland, and the Ottoman Empire. The young prince would stand silently in the great hall, his small hands clenched, his eyes sharp, learning early that a ruler's smile often hid a blade. Those who saw him even then said his gaze was calm but cold, a child who listened more than he spoke. And one day, those quiet eyes would hold the fate of nations, but for now, he was only a boy, watching a world built on fear, preparing him for a throne bathed in shadow. The journey was long. Weeks of riding through forests and plains, until the air grew warmer and the churches turned into mosques, and the songs of priests were replaced by the call to prayer. Vlad looked up at the grand city of Edirne, the Ottoman capital, a sea of domes and towers shimmering in golden sunlight. Inside its walls, he would learn a new world. The palace was vast, filled with gardens, marble halls, and soldiers from lands he had only heard of. Here, he studied Turkish, learned their tactics, their ways of war, their discipline, and their belief that loyalty to the Sultan was above all. But he was not free. He smiled when he had to, obeyed when watched, and waited when alone. Every whisper of his homeland, every rumor of his father's danger, tightened the cold knot inside him. Sometimes, Ottoman guards would speak of executions, and young Vlad would clench his fists under the table, his heart burning with fear, and something darker, a quiet rage. His brother Radu, gentle and kind, adapted easily. He learned the Turkish tongue like it was his own, and even converted to Islam, earning favor and praise. But Vlad stayed apart, a silent flame behind his eyes, refusing to bend. He trained with the Janissaries, learned the art of war, the rhythm of discipline. He rode, fought, cultivated, memorized every command and strategy, not because he loved his captors, but because he planned, even then, to use all he learned. When the time came to return, by the time he left the Sultan's court, he was no longer the same boy. The warmth of childhood had frozen into steel. He had learned to wait, to endure, to strike, and somewhere in the shadows of that palace, the legend of Dracula was born. Years passed, and far away from the palace of the Sultan, the winds of war reached Wallachia once again. Vlad's father, Vlad II Dracul, was betrayed and killed by rival nobles. His body buried without ceremony, his throne seized by another. When the news reached the Ottoman court, Vlad was only 17. He stood still as the words fell from the messenger's lips. The child who had once been a hostage was now a prince without a home. But even in that moment of loss, his mind began to turn. He knew the Sultan would see opportunity, a puppet prince to rule Wallachia in his name. And so, under the banner of the Ottomans, Vlad rode north. Not as a prisoner this time, but as a ruler in exile, returning to claim what was his. The ride through the mountains was silent. Each step of his horse echoed against the cliffs. Each gust of wind carried the ghosts of his childhood. when he saw the land again, the hills, the rivers, the small villages of his youth, it felt like meeting a memory that no longer recognized him. Home, but not the same. His first reign was short, fragile like a candle in the wind. The Hungarian-backed nobles who had killed his father rose against him almost immediately. Vlad fought with the fire of vengeance, but he was outnumbered and betrayed once more. He fled through the forests, across rivers and mountains, until he found refuge in Moldavia, under the protection of his uncle, Bogdan II. There, he learned patience. He watched other princes rule, studied their mistakes, their fears. He listened to soldiers speak of loyalty and power, and to priests whisper about destiny. He began to understand that to rule in a land like Wallachia, you could not be merciful. Mercy was weakness, and weakness meant death. Over the next years, he wandered between courts: Moldavia, Transylvania, Hungary, absorbing every secret, every strategy. He smiled when he needed to, bowed when required, and waited until the moment to strike returned. By the time he reached his 20s, the boy who had once been a hostage had become something else entirely. A man forged by betrayal and war. And soon, the throne that had cost his father his life would call him again. And this time, he would not fall. The year was 1456, and the world held its breath. From the mists of exile, Vlad returned to Wallachia once more. No longer a boy, no longer a pawn. He came back as a ruler, forged in fire, betrayal, and blood. He rode through the mountain passes at dawn, his banner dark against the rising sun. Behind him marched soldiers, hardened, loyal, silent. Ahead of him waited a broken kingdom, filled with nobles who had traded honor for gold, and peasants who no longer believed in mercy. The first thing Vlad saw upon reaching Targovishta was the decay of his father's land. Empty fields, ruined roads, fear in every face. He realized then that to rebuild Wallachia, he would have to become something the world feared. And so, he did. His first act as ruler was quiet, deliberate. He invited the great boyars, the nobles who had betrayed his father, to a feast. It was Easter Sunday, a day of light and forgiveness. The tables were rich with food, the air filled with the smell of roasted meat and wine. But as laughter echoed through the hall, Vlad watched and remembered. Each face, each name, each lie. When the music faded, he stood, and in a voice cold as steel, he gave a single command. The guards entered, the doors closed, and the feast became a purge Some nobles were executed where they sat. Others, the youngest and strongest, were taken to the mountains. There, under Vlad's orders, they built his new fortress, Panari Castle, stone by stone, in chains and silence. Those who survived saw their families no more, and those who disobeyed were lifted onto tall, sharpened stakes. The boy who had once been a hostage had learned well from his captors. Fear was the sharpest weapon of all. But in that terror came order. The roads became safe. Merchants traveled without fear. A coin left by the roadside remained untouched. The people whispered of their prince, a man both savior and monster. Some prayed for him. Others prayed to be unseen by him. And high above the Argish River, the walls of Panari Castle rose, a monument built by the hands of traitors, for a ruler who would never be betrayed again. The years passed, and the name Vlad Dracula began to echo beyond Walachia's borders. Merchants spoke of roads free of thieves. Travelers told stories of a ruler who demanded justice. Swift, cold, absolute, and in the taverns of Transylvania, they whispered of the forest of stakes, with the bodies of traitors hung in silence, turning slowly in the wind. To the people, he was both savior and nightmare. But to the Ottoman Empire, he was something worse. A threat. In the winter of 1459, a group of Turkish envoys arrived at Vlad's court in Targovishta. They came dressed in silk and confidence, carrying the Sultan's demands, tribute in gold, and obedience in blood. They entered the throne room slowly, bowing not to Vlad, but to the air before him. Their turbans stayed upon their heads, a sign of respect for their own custom, and a quiet defiance of his authority. Vlad smiled. He studied them for a long moment. Then, in a voice so gentle it barely carried through the hall, he said, "If it is your custom to wear your turbans before your ruler, then you shall keep them on." The guards stepped forward, and before the envoys could speak, the turbans were nailed to their heads. The room went still. No one moved. The scent of incense mixed with the iron tang of blood. Vlad turned away, calm, deliberate. To him, it was not madness. It was a message. The Sultan could send demands, but Wallachia would never kneel again. When word reached Mehmed II, the great conqueror of Constantinople, the earth itself seemed to tremble. No one defied the Sultan. Not a prince, not a king, not a single soul. And yet, Vlad had done it. The dragon's son had breathed fire, and the empire would answer. That winter, under the dark wings of snow and smoke, the Ottoman armies began to gather. Soldiers from every corner of their vast dominion, marching under the crescent moon. Drums thundered, steel gleamed, and far to the north, in his fortress above the river, Vlad waited, silent as the mountains. The snow melted early that year, and with it came the sound of marching. From the south, across the Danube River, the banners of the Ottoman Empire appeared like a black tide. Tens of thousands of soldiers, shields glinting in the cold light, their drums echoing through the valleys. The world's greatest army was coming for a single man. Vlad watched from the mountains. His eyes were steady. He knew their strength, their tactics, their arrogance. He had lived among them once, learned from them, and now he would use every lesson to destroy them. He ordered the fields burned, the wells poisoned, the villages emptied. He turned his homeland into a wasteland, a trap of ash and silence. The people hid in forests and caves. Animals fled. Nothing was left for the invaders but hunger and fear. As the Turkish soldiers advanced, they found only smoke and death. Crops gone, water blackened, every road watched by unseen eyes. At night, Vlad's men moved like shadows. They struck from the dark, silent blades, whispered screams, then nothing. They vanished before dawn, leaving behind only blood and the chill of terror. They called it the Night War. Vlad himself led the attacks. He rode beneath the moon, his armor wrapped in black cloth to hide the shine of steel. His soldiers followed his signal, a single flame in the distance, flickering like a heartbeat. They crept into the Ottoman camps, slipping between tents, cutting through ropes and throats alike. By the time the sun rose, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke and fear. The Turks began to see ghosts where there were none. They whispered his name, Dracula. Some said he flew through the night like a demon. Others swore they heard his laughter in the wind, but to Vlad, it was only war. Cold, perfect, and merciless. He did not fight for cruelty. He fought for survival, for a land too small to kneel and too proud to die. By summer, the mighty army that had come to crush him was starving, broken, and haunted by shadows that moved faster than their fear. And when they finally reached Targovishte, the sun rose over a site that would burn itself into legend. 20,000 Ottoman soldiers, impaled on stakes, an endless forest of the dead, a warning carved into the land itself. The Sultan's men stopped. Some fell to their knees. Even Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, turned his horse away. He had seen the price of defiance and the face of the dragon. Dawn broke, and the mist hung heavy over Targovishte. The Ottoman soldiers, weary from sleepless nights and endless ambushes, marched into silence. A silence so deep it felt alive. Then the fog lifted. Before them stretched a valley, a forest unlike any other. Tens of thousands of wooden stakes rose from the frozen earth, and upon each one, a body. Soldiers, nobles, prisoners of war, all impaled, their faces twisted in the stillness of death. The wind moaned softly through the field, and the crows circled above like dark clouds. The Turks stopped. No command could move them. Even the most hardened warriors lowered their eyes in horror. The Sultan himself, Mehmed II, rode to the front of his army. He looked out at what Vlad had built, a wall of flesh and wood, a message written in terror. And for the first time, the conqueror of Constantinople turned his army back. Vlad had won. The empire that crushed kingdoms had been driven away by a single prince and his ghosts. But victory came with a price. Wallachia burned. The fields were ash. The villages silent. The rivers ran dark with blood and memory. To the people, he was both savior and curse. The man who protected them from the Turks, but ruled them with fear sharper than any sword. In the great halls of Europe, his name spread like wildfire. To the kings and popes, he was a hero, the one who stood against the Ottoman tide. Letters praised him, calling him the defender of Christendom. But the travelers who passed through his land told another story. They spoke of the impaled, of cities haunted by the smell of death, of a ruler who watched executions with calm eyes, as if death itself obeyed him. The line between savior and monster grew thinner with every story. And yet, in the darkness of his castle, Vlad sat alone, knowing the truth. That fear had saved his land, but cost him his soul. Above the mountains, the sun sank slowly, turning the stakes to black silhouettes against the dying light. And somewhere in the wind, a voice seemed to whisper his name. Dracula, the Impaler. After the retreat of the Ottoman army, the land of Wallachia fell into an uneasy peace. For the first time in years, there were no drums of war in the distance, no foreign banners across the fields, only silence and the heavy weight of what had been done. Vlad ruled from his fortress above the river. From the walls of Panari, he could see the mist curling over the valleys and the faint lights of villages trying to live again. He rebuilt the roads, restored the markets, and made the land safe once more. Merchants returned. The poor could travel without fear. A coin left upon the ground remained untouched until morning. Wallachia had never been so secure, nor so afraid, for Vlad's justice was absolute. He trusted no one, not nobles, not merchants, not priests. He believed kindness invited betrayal, and mercy was a knife turned inward. Those who lied were impaled. Those who stole, impaled. Those who plotted impaled, the forest of stakes grew again, not from war, but from order. And yet, the people whispered still. They feared him, yes, but they also spoke his name with pride. He had done what no one else dared. He had faced the Sultan and lived. To the west, the kings of Europe watched with fascination. The Pope called him a defender of the faith, a wall between Christendom and the Crescent. But others began to wonder if the prince who fought monsters had become one himself. The stories spread. A man who dined among the dying, who watched his enemies impaled while sipping wine as their screams faded. Was it true? No one knew, but truth mattered little. Legends grow faster than armies. In Hungary, King Matthias Corvinus began to worry. Vlad had become too strong, too independent. A ruler who feared no empire was dangerous, even to his allies. And so, in secret halls and candlelit chambers, letters were written, rumors whispered, and alliances shifted like shadows in the night. Vlad could sense it. The silence of the forest had changed. The wolves no longer howled far away. They circled closer, just beyond the light of his fire. He stood upon the walls of Ponari, feeling the cold wind on his face, and whispered to the dark, "Let them come." The year was 1462, and the air above Wallachia carried a strange stillness. The Turks had been driven back. The land was quiet again, but peace is the cruelest illusion of all. In the west, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary watched Vlad with cautious eyes. Once, he had called him ally. Now, he called him threat. Vlad's victories had made him famous across Europe. Too famous, perhaps. He had become a symbol, a man who defied the greatest empire of the age. And kings do not share their thrones easily with symbols. Rumors began to spread that Vlad was negotiating in secret with the Ottomans, that he was ready to betray the Christian cause. Letters appeared, bearing his seal, his handwriting. But the letters were false, forged, a trap laid by those who feared his independence. Still, when whispers travel far enough, they begin to sound like truth. King Matthias sent a message to Vlad, an invitation, a meeting, a promise of alliance renewed. And so, the prince set out for Buda, the Hungarian capital. He rode with a small guard, his cloak black against the pale sky. He carried no fear, for he believed that honor still lived among kings. But when he arrived, the gates closed behind him. The guards took his sword. The king's men read the letters aloud, accusing him of treason. Vlad stood silent. He did not beg. He did not deny. He simply looked into the eyes of the king and said, "You too have learned fear." They imprisoned him, not in chains of iron, but in the golden comfort of castles. Years passed, 10, perhaps more, behind stone walls, in rooms filled with books, candles, and shadows. Sometimes he would hear the bells of the city and wonder if his land still remembered his name. Outside, others ruled in his place. Weaker men, Hungarian puppets. The forests that once whispered his legend grew quiet again, as though waiting for the echo of hoofbeats that never came. Yet even in captivity, the fire within him did not fade. He read. He planned. He dreamed of the mountains of Wallachia, the smell of pine, the glimmer of moonlight on his fortress walls, and somewhere in the dark he whispered to himself, "They can cage the dragon, but they cannot silence his fire." Years drifted by like falling ash, and the world forgot the name Vlad Dracula. The man who once defied empires now lived in quiet captivity, a shadow behind castle walls, his hands no longer stained with blood, but with dust from the books he read by candlelight. He studied war, religion, and fate. He thought of his father, his brother, and the homeland that had betrayed him as much as he had saved it. Then, one winter morning, a messenger came. The Ottoman Empire was advancing again. The lands of Hungary trembled, and Wallachia, his beloved, broken land, was falling into ruin under weak rulers. King Matthias needed him once more. The same man who had caged him now came to open the door. When Vlad stepped out of the castle, the cold air hit his face like a memory. He was older now, his hair touched with gray, his eyes deeper, darker, but the fire within him still burned. He said nothing as he mounted his horse. He simply looked to the east, toward the mountains that had once known his name, and rode. Through forests and ruined villages he passed, each one a ghost of what had been. The people who saw him did not cheer. They only stared in silence, for they knew the stories, and they knew the shadow that followed him. In 1476, after more than 10 years in exile, Vlad returned to Wallachia once again, for the third and final time. He found a land hollowed by greed and fear, its people starving, its nobles corrupt. But when they saw him, they bowed, because in his presence they remembered what it meant to obey. He rebuilt what he could. He reformed the courts. He restored order. And once again, the roads became safe. The thieves vanished, and the whispers returned. But he was not the same man. The fury of youth had turned to cold certainty. He no longer fought for glory, only for control, for peace, for something close to redemption. At night, he would walk the walls of his fortress, looking out across the dark valleys. The wind would carry the faint sounds of wolves, and he would whisper to the mountains, "I am home." But even as he rebuilt his realm, he knew the the peace would not last. Enemies waited in every shadow. Turks, nobles, traitors, all watching, all waiting for the dragon to fall one last time. Winter came early that year, thick fog blanketing the mountains of Wallachia, as though the heavens themselves wished to hide what was coming. Vlad's banners once again flew above the towers of Panari. But below those mountains, his enemies were gathering. The Ottomans, angered by his return, marched north once more, their blades gleaming in the pale light, their drums echoing through the snow. And among them were men of Wallachia itself, his own nobles, his own people. Those who once bowed to him now rode beside the Turks, their loyalty sold for gold and safety. Vlad knew the truth. He had ruled through fear, and fear does not love its master. Still, he prepared. He gathered what men he could: loyal soldiers, hungry peasants, veterans who had followed him through hell. They stood upon the frozen plains, their armor dull, their eyes steady. There were no great speeches, only silence, and the sound of the wind between the stakes. He looked to the horizon and saw the glimmer of torches, thousands of them, a river of fire flowing toward him, and in that moment the dragon smiled. When the battle began, it was chaos. Steel against steel, fire against frost, men screaming in the snow. Vlad rode at the front, his black cloak billowing, his sword cutting through the mist. He fought like a man possessed, like every breath was borrowed, and every swing a prayer. He was wounded, but he did not fall. He fought until the field itself seemed to bleed. And when at last they surrounded him, he turned toward the mountains, toward the home he had built and lost so many times, and whispered softly, "This is enough." They say he was struck down upon that snowy plain, his body pierced by the very weapons he had once commanded. Some say his head was taken to Istanbul, displayed before the Sultan as proof that even dragons can die. Others whisper that he vanished into the fog, and that on certain winter nights, when the moon is pale and the air is still, a rider in black is seen along the cliffs of Punari, his horse silent, his eyes burning red. Perhaps he never truly died. Perhaps the dragon only sleeps. The snows melted again that spring, and the rivers of Wallachia ran quietly, as though washing away the memory of war. The castle of Poenari stood empty, its walls cracked, its torches long extinguished. Only the wind remained, sliding through the stones like a voice that would not rest. The peasants spoke his name still, in hushed tones by the fire. Some said the prince had been a saint, a guardian who gave his soul so his people might live free. Others whispered he was a devil, a man who ruled through terror and drank from the fear of those who obeyed him. But all agreed on one thing: his name could never be forgotten. In the great halls of Europe, his story twisted and grew. A rumor turned into legend. A legend turned into myth. The man became a shadow, and the shadow became Dracula, the dragon's son, the impaler, the prince of darkness. Yet, if you listen closely, beyond the blood and the fear, you can still hear something human beneath it all. A child once stolen from his home. A boy who watched his world collapse. A man who tried to build order from chaos and paid for it with his soul. Maybe he wasn't a monster. Maybe he was simply a mirror, showing the world what it had already become. Tonight, his story ends, but his echo lingers. In the mountains of Transylvania, the mist still curls around broken towers, and when the moon is full, some say the wind still carries a voice, a whisper that calls your name and reminds you that legends never truly die. Good night, dear listener, and sleep well. May the whispers of Dracula fade softly into your dreams.